Welcome to the Have Courage Summit, a summit dedicated to helping you get out of your own way and to unleash the potential that sits within you. So today I'm so grateful to welcome Mr. Hung Lee from WorkShape onto the summit. Hi there, Hung.
Hey, Gary, how are you doing? Pleasure to be on.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for joining us. So for anyone that might be seeing you for the first time, we recently also recorded a podcast on the Value Through Vulnerability podcast and spoke a lot around inclusion and community. And our topic for today, Hung, is around community, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. A real passionate topic of mine and something I can see, people need community from a personal perspective, but also, increasingly the business value of it is very self-evident as well. So yeah, I think this is going to be a big topic for a lot of people in the current and actually the near future as well.
Brilliant. Well, as we get going, would you mind letting any of the viewers understand a bit more about you, what's your background, and what brings you here today?
Absolutely. So long story short, historically, I've been a recruiter, always been a recruiter. So agency, in-house, consultant, launched a recruiting tech platform called workshape.io, which is a matching product for companies looking to recruit software engineers. And latterly, I've also launched a online community called Recruiting Brain Food, which starts off as a newsletter. And now it's like migrating onto an online community and also live stream and stuff like that as well.
No, that's brilliant. And just on the sort of topic of courage, has there been any courage required from your side to sort of step into those new media outlets, or?
I'm not comfortable with applying that term to the things I've done, Gary. I've got to be honest,
Okay.
because they don't feel particularly courageous for me.
Okay.
I think that maybe this is a little bit in the sense that I have a different attitude towards being public with a lot of stuff. I'm happy to share it. I'm happy to explore, and generally happy to kind of fail publicly a little bit. I think that's okay. Like, for instance, I released a video just yesterday, handshot video with a mobile phone. Of course, the subtitles were cut off either side. It was terrible. But whatever, it's out there, people are looking at it, and maybe someone's got some value out of it. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I've got the view. I would not use the word courage in my case. Certainly there's times when I've required courage and the courage hasn't been there, but not when it comes down to stuff like this, I have to say.
No, perfect. As we get going with community, do you mind opening up? What have you been courageous about in your sort of life today? Is there a particular moment where you think that did take some courage, just out of interest?
Yeah, I've actually tested my courage. It's quite a funny story actually, but I wouldn't recommend it. But basically, all right, let's rewind back a couple of years. Long time now, but I was involved actually in a rather bad car accident a couple of decades ago. So now this is an accident where obviously no one died. The outcomes of it were still okay, but I was pretty banged up at the end of the day. And you know what? I had a crisis of courage there, Gary, because I felt then, and I feel now, I could have prevented the accident. I was the passenger in the car. I saw the oncoming vehicle. I could and should have taken the wheel, and I could have steered us off, and I could have avoided the smash. So that, I think, is definitely. I froze, man. I froze. I was fearful. I just watched it happen, right? And had the other driver not avoided us, because I saw the whites of his eyes when he was coming at us, had he not turned off and missed the head on, I'd not be here. I'd be dead. And yeah, so that caused me to really think about where I was. Where was my mettle, right? Where was my courage? And I was found wanting there. So I went through a period of time where I tried to test my courage all the time. So whenever there was something I was scared to do, I would just go, yeah, I'd do it. But that experiment actually was quite short because the funny story was, because obviously I was banged up and I was in and out of hospital and all this type of stuff. So a lot of metal work in, a lot of metal work out, etc. And during one of these operations, I just thought to myself, you know what? Usually you go under general anesthetic, you knock you out before they take metal work out your leg. And I thought, hang on, maybe this is an opportunity for me to test my metal, because I was at this low point where I realized, oh, you've got no bottle and you've created this situation that, you're now in this scenario. Why don't I just build some courage then? And I just said to the doctor, you know what, I don't want general anesthetic. I want to see what happens in the operating theatre. Can you just put me under local? And the doctor says, are you sure? This is generally something that is a routine, because you're removing basically bolts from your knee. Metal bolts went into the knee, and they had to take them out because I was getting better, recovery, etc. And they said, actually, this is a routine general anesthetic thing, but upon patient request, you can do this because anesthetic can be quite dangerous, right? And I was thinking half of thing, yeah, anesthetic's dangerous, but actually it's quite interesting to maybe watch this. And secondly, here's a test of my courage. Have I got the bottle to do it, right? So I said, yeah, let's do the local anesthetic. And you know what, Gary? Doc said, yeah, fine. When I knew when I made the mistake, when he came back with what was the biggest needle I've ever seen in my entire life. It was like a horse tranquilizer. And he just put it down. I just thought, yeah, that's a mistake to have made this suggestion to this doctor. But he's now going to inject my knee with his local anesthetic and then make that norm and then have it happen. But anyway, by that time, I had another crisis of courage because I wasn't brave enough to reverse my decision. Right? So I had too much pride now. And I said, oh, no, all right, well, I'll just go and do it. And obviously he stuck this needle into the knee. It was just the worst experience ever. Pulled it out. The knee was kind of under local, very numbed up. And in I go to the operating theatre, right? And I thought, all the way through, I'm thinking, this is the dumbest thing ever. Like, why do you even want to see this? And I was just lying there thinking, right, is it too late for me to request the general now? And I tell you what, again, the moment where I realized I'd made a mistake and bottled it once more, so this is a series of failures of courage, right? Was when they lie you back and the nurse wheels in a trolley with all the surgical equipment. And the surgical equipment's wrapped up into this kind of, it's like a lamatron, right? It's like a big sheet, but it's wrapped up in a roll, and they just roll it out like this. And I was lying back next to this trolley as they came out, and she rolled all of these implements. I heard the noises of all of these scalpels and all of this. So I just took it and think, what are you doing, man? All of these implements are going to chop into your body, and you're going to be watching this. And I just bottled it there again. Again, I was too terrified to request a different thing. And I just thought, right, I just got to somehow take deep breaths and get through this. And, what was very interesting is that the doctor and the operating team, they're used to the patient being under general. Right. So they don't have, there's no like bedside manner for these guys. They're not thinking, oh, a nice doctor, there's a patient under psychological stress. None of that. Black and decorate. They're straight in. Not word of a lie. I mean, so before they even started, I was sitting there thinking maybe there'd be some dialogue. Not at all. Swap you down and straight away they're chopping in with this thing. And I was thinking all of this warm feeling was coming down my leg. Yeah, it's probably my blood there, isn't it? I look at it, yeah, it's my blood. And they're just chopping into the knee here. And I'm thinking, wow, this is a bit of a horror show. And I just had to, I started chanting in my mind, just putting a mantra through it, saying, just get through it, Hung, you're going to get through it. Hung, you're going to get through it. Just kept on saying that over and over again. And the entire operation took maybe 35, 40 minutes, something like that. And it was like, what it was. Yeah, felt like forever. Chopped the way through. And worst bit to hear, Gary, was how they took the screws out. Again, you're thinking this is science, mate. This is like DIY stuff. The equipment looks like you come out your dad's garage. So the thing just, I don't know what those screw mover things are. You know how they, one of those, right? Into your knee, and he's got it online. He's jamming it in like this, into the knee, and he's like grinding away. And I'm thinking, dude, this guy's going to break my knee here, isn't he? And I just remember feeling very concerned, but at the same time not really articulating that, and just trying to mentally think, you know what, you're gonna make it. This isn't gonna kill you. But yeah, this is obviously a mistake. We just gotta see it through, So yeah, when you talk about failure of courage, there's multiple episodes where that happened. Really start, it's a physical failure of courage, right? So this is not I've bottled it because I haven't given a speech, or I've done this, that, the literally was, I was fearing for my life multiple times, feared pain, feared all of that, and yeah, most of those points where I felt those things, I would say I failed.
But do you know what, we'll come back to community for anything that's watching us in a second, but do you know something? How many of your recruiting brain food sort of email list are aware of this story?
None. I've never told this story to anybody.
There's a wonderful gift right there.
Yeah, although I tell you something, it's so strange because when when you're injured, you feel like you need to respond. So I had to stop myself from getting up and having a go at the people. You know what I mean? Because you feel like, oh my, all this. So in the end, the outcome was, I mean, the surgeon, when he stitched her up, he said, yeah, you're a very brave man. He said that to me after he finished that, because I actually was quite calm because I was freezing. My mind got all over the place, and I was taking deep breaths. I remember one point where he said, "Do you need more anesthetic?" Because intake of breath, there was some pain there, and I just remember saying very calmly, "No, proceed. I can handle it." And I listened to it back now, and I think, Hong, that you sound like a badass when you said that. But you know what? I just wanted to get through this thing. I didn't want him to then, let's bring the anesthetist. No, this is already a nightmare. I need to get through this, right? So I think on the outside in, it looks like physical bravery, right? But mentally, and we're talking about mentally here, I can tell you, Gary, there was no courage in there. I was terrified. I was failing. I was not. I could not be described as being courageous, I would say, in throughout that process.
Well, look, thank you for sharing again. And I think it's a really interesting, though, because on the one hand, you talk about you can recognize where you weren't being courageous, but at the same time, for you now publicly, knowing this could be seen by up to 100,000 people, you're being pretty courageous, being very open about your story. So.
Yeah, it's a fairly funny story, and I don't mind telling it. But you know what? Maybe what's interesting here is what is courage really? Is it how people perceive courage to be? I think a lot of people who, he was a hero, or she did amazing on that. I just wonder whether that's the same. That may be incongruent to what that person was actually feeling at the time, which is why you get a lot of these definite heroes always step back saying, "Please don't call me a hero. I don't accept the label." Because I was terrified at the time. I was just going on instinct or whatever. So I think, courage is not that easily defined. I think it's quite a slippery concept, and it may be a little bit more kind of, I'm going to use a term that doesn't exist, perspectival. It's based on perspective, right? Like who is thinking about courage, and who is doing the thing right now, and cannot be described as courage. So yeah, it's not an easy concept, I don't think.
No, I like that. And I think certainly something around dialing up and dialing down, so it's all relative. Everything's relative, isn't it? So, interesting. So let's get back to community. So, because that's brilliant. Honestly, that's a lovely segue. So thank you, Hung, for that.
Sorry, I know it's going to go into the cutting room, but, we could probably save it for some of that.
No, it's really not going to the cutting room. It will be the front end of our discussion. Don't worry about that.
Fantastic.
So coming back to your sort of anthropology background and around communities now, sort of, what does that look like for you? So how are communities created in your experience and with your sort of understanding, Hung, out of interest?
Yeah, so from our previous dialogue, Gary, that I've got a little bit of an academic training or academic reading of communities, given sort of me reading anthropology at university, and therefore I come at a lot of these topics that are now happening in HR with an anthropological kind of view, right? So I use a lot of terms that probably people might feel a bit strange or out of context or whatever, but it's because I'm committed to the academic side of it. But with community development, one of the truths that we haven't truly grasped is that a community really is created at the boundaries of that community, meaning you need to have a group of people that are in an in-group, but you also need to have an out-group. So communities are created in opposition to the individuals that you deny entry to. And in the same way, in psychology, your identity is also created by what you're not as much as what you are. And that is kind of a parallel theme within the sister discipline. I think that anthropology and psychology are probably siblings in terms of, the sorts of things they think about. They're just that their unit of analysis is different. Psychology more the individual, anthropology more the group. But I think this thing goes across them both. Basically, it's about who is in, who is out. And that's actually a difficult thought for a lot of people in the HR and tech space and all the rest of it in recruiting space, because of course we want to create inclusive environments, and of course we want to we want to make people feel welcome and belong and so forth. But the reality of it is we don't actually mean everybody.
Yeah. So when you're talking, because I guess if someone wants to be part of that in-group to some extent, is this, people talk about culture, don't they? How does someone fit in with the organizational culture or the structure, etc.? As you say, to some extent, you're denying people coming in because it could corrupt that tribe or that structure that you've intentionally designed to some extent.
Yeah. You probably haven't designed it. You've evolved it, because most cultures aren't designed. They're sort of emergent from the dominant people that are there, might establish the norms that are then copied or by others. So very few cultures are designed in the way an engineer might. It's not people in the lab coat saying, "Oh, let's have this value." It's basically some leader would establish the norm, and then suddenly, that's a good idea. Everyone starts adopting that norm, and then you have a new person coming in that it doesn't adopt that norm. Well, he or she, that this new person will be told in subtle ways that for you, in order to get on, you probably need to adapt that norm. So, there's all kinds of controversies, I think, are just around the corner for us, because what we are looking to try and do is in business is try and recruit diversity of opinion. We have, I think, moving towards this idea that diversity of opinion is actually a business strength, and helps the company perform and all the rest of it. But I think we're going to run into a few things where we should contradict that. It's almost like we typically overcorrect on a lot of social movements, I think, and we end up making progress. But remember back even 5 years ago, hiring for cultural fit was the thing. Like, we needed to have cultural fit above and beyond someone's technical competence or functional competence, whatever, because we can teach that, but we can't teach all of these cultural values and so forth. Now that was probably an overcorrection at the time, and now I think this idea of hyper inclusivity, we need to include everyone, including the diverse and all of this type of stuff, neurodiverse and so forth, and that actually is anti-cultural fit in many respects. People are using the term cultural add, which is a nice way to say, we want this new person to come in and challenge our culture and actually add to it and do all of those things. Now, the problem around the corner, the people who are not seeing right now, but again, putting my anthropological hat on a little bit, where you will see is that if you have too much cultural adds, what will occur is that you'll diffuse a lot of the values that made your company or business or tribe or whatever it is what it was, and you'll get resistance to that. And it's not ipso facto that having lots of different cultural adds necessarily means better performance. There's actually lots of evidence to suggest that when a unit is under stress and adversity, you actually need less cultural add and you need cultural consistency. Good example would be military. When you're under fire and you're fighting a war, actually you do need to have very predictable behaviors in that group of people that are fighting that war. Because if you don't, actually you will not be able to be efficient in doing these very hard tasks that you can do. So I think when the external environment is very adverse, the best performing units are probably the ones that are fairly homogeneous. Where the external environment is benign, then probably the units that succeed more are the ones that are heterogeneous, because you've got more opportunities to explore in a more benign environment. And the environment could be any layer of abstraction. Could be the globe, could be the universe, could be your business market, could be your street, whatever it might be. But those things interplay. It's not ipso facto diversity equals better performance. Diversity may mean better performance in the context of a benign external environment. But maybe if the environment turns hostile, maybe you need something else.
It's interesting. Did you think sort of individuals, leaders are sort of aware of that dichotomy you just described? It's certainly something before I met you. It would never have come into my mind to think of that.
This is academic stuff, right? And it takes time for academia to percolate into business, and oftentimes it never does because it's never perceived to be relevant. What we are seeing, though, we are seeing company anthropologists starting to happen now. Like jobs for anthropologists in business, because we're aware that kind of being that person that is trying to look after the cultural processes in a business is not something. It's not an administrative function. It's something where you need someone with this kind of a slightly deeper knowledge about how groups operate, how groups perform in certain contexts, and this is where I think I would hope to see. I think it would be a welcome thing to see companies actually start to employ individuals that have anthropological, sociological, psychological training to perform these types of roles. I'm starting to see it happen, but it's way not sort of beyond the mainstream. It's only the leading edge type businesses that are doing this type of stuff right now.
And would those leading edge businesses be tech based, Hung, from what you're hearing? Was it different, or just a range? Or
you know what, my bias is towards tech, but I do think tech businesses generally are more innovative culturally, because I think innovation's kind of in the DNA a little bit, and because they're usually making a product that maybe hasn't happened before, or they're attacking a market that hasn't been penetrated before, or they're trying to create new categories. So they default to innovation. And that sort of percolates throughout all of the rest of the business. I think if you're working for a mature organization that's been there for 100 years, that knows how to make its money, you'd have a totally different set of challenges in terms of, let's bring an anthropologist in. I don't think that would probably be the most natural fit straight away. Or at least, you'd have a very different experience in that company than you would in a fast-growing tech business.
This is interesting, actually. So my full-time job is in that traditional sort of chemical, oil and gas sort of background, and exactly what you described is very, very relevant. I guess there's an interesting thing for individuals and leaders right now, though, with what you're describing in terms of community, in that there's definitely a move towards people being able to be more of their, call it true self, living something more aligned to their values, trying to bring more of themselves into the workplace, etc., etc. For me, I think that's a positive shift, but I'm wondering, based on communities, how acceptable that will be if you've got a 10,000 person organization, they all want to bring more of themselves into that system.
Yeah. I think there's always a tension. There's a tension between the individual and the group, and that's true for any system of organization, which is why you actually need a bureaucracy. There's always a utopianism that particularly young people have, where they want to imagine a world that is, everyone is free from oppression, and everyone's free from systems and all of this red tape and stuff like that. But really, the only freedom that's available for an individual is to absolutely be an individual. A hermit on a mountain can have all of those freedoms. But if you're interacting with other people, then actually you do need to submit a bit of your control. You do need to give up a little bit of your individual sovereignty in order to get the benefits of living in a group. And that means you have to bend a little bit to what those organizations, what is good for the organization. What is absolutely optimal for the organization is never 100% optimal for every individual within that organization. And there probably is a number that, smarter people than me could probably measure. Let's just imagine it, maybe 70-80%. You need like a lot of your people in your organization, tribe, whatever it might be, need to be 70 to 80% aligned to what the organizational goal should be. And the folks that are 30% aligned, you get it. You need to get them out. They're not. They're basically malcontents and individuals that are going to sabotage the goal, actually. So I do think that on the current structure of how organizations are and the relationships that we have, which is essentially this organization employs you, therefore you need to come into the framework of that organization, then yeah, the individual is going to have to bend probably a little bit more than perhaps they're comfortable with. The question for me that's more interesting is that type of relationship going to persist in the near future? So in other words, I do believe individuals want to exert a little bit more sovereignty, exert a little bit more control over their daily operating way of working and all that type of stuff. But can you do that within the framework of a company, or does maybe the idea of a company needs to change a little bit, and perhaps the way in which we start, working together is not necessarily based on this framework of working for an employer, but in a slightly different way. There's to put this into context, there's an economist I think called Ronald Coase, who he was one of the first people who started to speculate about the nature of a corporation, like the nature of the company. Why did the company exist, and why weren't we all just like networks of freelancers? Why was there such a thing as your business, creating chemicals and all the rest of it, employing this huge infrastructure, creating all of these roles and all the rest of it? Why couldn't this happen through the exact same number of people just all operating together in this way? And his answer was simply, it was very difficult for that network of individuals to consistently acquire customers. Because if everyone is out there trying to acquire customers, then basically you're competing with each other, and you're not spending time specializing in the activities that you needed to specialize in order to deliver a complex product like chemicals, for instance. So he speculated that the reason why companies exist is essentially because they're able to aggregate the demand, and they're able to mobilize the supply, a demand for the service supply on the labor side to a particular customer, and also accrue brand value over time, so that it becomes easier to acquire those customers. And it's very difficult for the individual to replicate that. But in a hyper-connected world, where everyone's a publisher, everyone has got super number of connections, maybe the value we're all trying to supply now could also be packaged in a certain way that is more monetizable than it was before. Then perhaps the old Coasian question will be raised again. Why should a company exist in the current way it does? Maybe the future of networked businesses, or a heavily networked kind of bunch of individuals, might in fact be the optimal way in which we start connecting sort of the buyer and seller and of services and products.
So it's really interesting to describe. Before you actually said the comment about a network of freelancers, I've got a sense, Hung, that is actually what's starting to happen. I do feel that there's an exponentially more people setting up, probably at a bigger rate than I've noticed in the last 20 years, the last 2 or 3 years. So there's a definite shift to that sovereignty, to that trying to make, but I think it's within more sort of knowledge work, sort of consultancy, rather than, as you say, in sort of aggregated heavy industry. So it's almost like there's two very distinct markets setting up for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think the knowledge workers are definitely all going to go down this route, simply because there are significant benefits to doing it that way. And again, you could apply Marxist analysis to this, when you think about the corporation obviously taking surplus value, which is profit. But surplus value is actually the labor of the people delivering it. So, we've all worked for businesses that have earned X charges out for, 20 grand a day when, we're getting a tenth of that or less. And then the question mark happens, why? Shouldn't a little bit more percentage of that value be delivered to me? So ultimately, I do think knowledge workers will go to this networked way of working. It will be less. There's push and pull factors to this, in the sense the individuals, I think, want it, because it gives that degree of control and sovereignty and all the rest of it. The control of life, get rid of the commute, be able to be with your family at the time if you're choosing. All of those hugely important things that we can't really put a value on. Really, it's worth more than the money. But also from the employer side, traditional employer, when you're hiring an individual, it's actually a super high risk investment. This is why a lot of the recruiting problems exist. It's because we know getting it wrong is such dangerous. It's such a mistake that we do everything we can to avoid it. Which is why you have this battery of assessments. You must be interviewed by 5-6 people. Psychometric tests, functional tests. Then there's a background check because we're not happy with all of that due diligence. And there's even a clause in the contract to say, after 3 months, if I don't like it, you're still gone. So we're still not sure, right? We're doing all of this due diligence. Why? Because the decision is too hard to make. If the risk is too high for an employer to do this. Whereas if you were able to simply slide this person in or out, based on on a more on demand basis, suddenly it makes more sense. It's like, again, rewind back 15 years. People used to buy databases, right? There'll be database suppliers. You buy JD Edwards, you buy SAP, you buy Oracle, whatever. And you know what? That'd be multi-billion-dollar commitment, 5-year implementation plan, life-changing for the company. For the guy making the procurement decision, career changing also. No one makes those decisions anymore. We've all moved to the SaaS model. We want a model where we can switch this on, switch this off, upgrade, downgrade as we see fit. Zero risk, please. I don't want to have to make this mistake. So I think hiring employees is very much like buying Oracle was in the 1990s. Huge, huge decision, which means you need to do all of this due diligence, which creates this terrible candidate experience. You end up making this hire in the hope that it delivers to your expectation, which I'm not sure you could ever be accurate with the forecast on that. It's you got to just try and see, which a networked way of working, a non-hire way of engaging with someone would give you the ability to test that at very low risk for you. So push and pull factor, I think, will transform the nature of companies and transform the nature of work, really, or at least the contractual relationship of work.
Something? It's so interesting, Bill, because you've got that side of it, which is this for me, what's quite a clear evolution. Yet we've still got what I see as a lot of individuals and leaders that are very stuck in the 1970s, 80s way of thinking around how do you engage, how do you motivate, how do you bring more of that self to work, etc., from a human aspect. So there's a big push on more human-centered design, etc. Yet we've got quite mechanistic ways of thinking still in organizations. So there seems to be a bit of a gap that's progressively being bridged at the moment. I don't know if you see that at all.
I think maybe that's right, but also I don't see that as a surprise, really. I think that we can't expect a change to happen. Like, maybe we think change. We need to rethink what change is. We often imagine it just being a big bang moment, an event. Sort of the BC AD type of thing. Things just the radical transformation. But it's a process. It's like Brexit. We assume Brexit just happens. There's a line in the sand. Suddenly it's all changed. You know what? This is just going to take decades to unfold, as any big change does, unless it's a traumatic change. The only times when change truly does happen in this way is when a meteorite comes in and wipes out the dinosaurs. Okay, you've got change. But we probably don't want that type of change, right? If we want to stay around, the sort of change we have is a procedural one, and things gradually shift. It always happens a lot slower than we think, and then it happens a lot faster than we realized once the momentum is actually there.
Interesting. How do we, in your opinion, create sort of improved dialogue between communities? If you've got A community and B community, Of course, they've got their own system, they've got their own tribe, etc. How do you make sure they are at least communicating in a way that's good for everybody?
So I think firstly, we need to recognize that we talked about the boundary being the place where the community is made. Those boundaries are often permeable. They're much more permeable than you think. This is not the Trumpian wall, which, you know, the out group is definitely always out, the in group is definitely always in. No, people actually oscillate through in between them. And again, using the anthropological view, even that is even true from an ethnic point of view. So oftentimes we think ethnicity is very fixed, but in fact, no, it's permeable. And as long as you do certain things, then you can be accepted and through those things. So that's the number one thing. The communication between communities. Those communities are not as discrete as we probably conceptually think of them. They're quite messy at the boundary. This is the first thing. It gives us a clue what we can do when we talk about communication. The second thing we need to do is to also recognize how we disagree. And that's one of the management sort of ideas that I need to get better at, but I did kind of learn, at least on a theoretical level, is that you need to agree how we disagree. And when you're looking to communicate with people who do have different views, we need to say, look, Gary, you might have a different view in this, I've got a different view in this, but let's scenario plan what happens when we have a disagreement. What happens there? We need to be clear on what that situation looks like. Otherwise, we will both continue to negotiate a scenario that is optimal for us. And that becomes super frustrating. So you need to be able to say, look, we disagree on this, therefore, this is now parked here and we'll revisit it later, or this is how we then sort out that problem. Let's focus on what we do agree on. What is the common ground that we both say, yeah, that's true. So communication, when you look at between communities, is very similar to communication between individuals. You've got to recognize dispute and conflict. You've got to hear the other side. And again, this is a lot of like conversational theory. A lot of the frustration and anger that people feel is often the sense that you're not confident the other side understands your position accurately. And the way in which you correctly disagree with someone is really try and reflect back honestly your assessment of what this person has said. So let's say you say something that is that I find I dispute. The first thing I do isn't to dispute what you said. The first thing I need to do is to just explain back to you, hey, listen, Gary, you've said this. This is what I understand you mean. Can you just make sure I've got you accurate and correct here? Because otherwise, I'll end up arguing something that you don't actually believe is true, and you get frustrated, and I get frustrated, and actually, all of that's wasted energy because none of it was based on fact. And then if I'm able to articulate back what you say and truly believe, then actually a lot of the heat goes out because you can say, you know what, Hung's actually got my position accurately there. And then suddenly I may be able to say, look, Gary, I get that. Here's what I think. Then I say this, and you know what? Your turn then is to reflect back to me whether you've understood me. And you'll find if you go through this type of practice, a lot of the negative energy sort of disappears. That creates a lot of this divisiveness that's out there. It's very oftentimes people's motivations. You can resonate with why people are motivated to think in a certain way. A lot of these sort of feelings are recognizable in us. And yes, I get it. I understand this. And you may still end up disputing it very passionately at the end, right? So none of this is to say you need to abandon your positions. It's just to be clear what you're arguing about. So yeah, in a community side, if there is groups of people that need to talk to each other and there's a motivation to do that, then that's one of the techniques that really you should try.
It's pretty, it reminds me so much of my own experience, part of this whole summit around being more courageous. So I used to be the most irritating, I was one of the worst people to try and manage Hung because I was the guy that was like, this could be so much better. Let's change it now. This is what we do. And then my boss would be like, yeah, but Gary, how's it fit into the rest? It doesn't matter. It's incredible. Let's go do it now. It can do this sort of value. And I just didn't have the self-awareness a few years ago to realize how difficult I was to manage. So rather than him saying to me, Gary, let's have a conversation, he'd back me down, a little bit of passive-aggressive management. but I now
Yeah.
see it for what it was, which is my issue mainly.
We all have. The thing is, though, Gary, we all have those issues. It's not like it's something that there's ever a moment. I think the biggest risk we have is if we think, oh, we've made it, we're now kind of, this now wise person. That's not the case. It's an ongoing. It's an ongoing thing, and you need to practice it. You need to practice the ability to argue, or shall we say, to debate, in such a way that these things sort of. And I fail at this, right? So, I mean, even last week, I could quote you an example where I got extraordinarily irate at a friend of mine who had a political position I disagree with. And very quickly, the only good thing I did in the course of that conversation was to actually stop the argument and explain to him why I was not able to continue this argument, because I was so emotionally invested in it now. That I would only just add fuel to whatever fire was burning. So the only thing I was able to do, the only thing I can look at that my behavior there and say, you know what, the only good thing you did is actually stop what you're doing and make sure that conversation didn't continue. But yeah, this is constant practice, right? Constant practice. Get better at this type of this method of disputation, and understand, when to stop when you are the person that's actually not helping the case.
That's just such great advice. Such great advice. I've got a million and one examples as well, but I think we'll start to wrap up now because you've been awesome and given us so much of your valuable time. How can people get hold of you, Hung, if they want to sort of reach out to you or follow up with you directly?
Yeah, so again, I'm happy to chat with most people on most channels, but you can follow me on Twitter at Hung Lee. If you're interested in recruiting or hiring and cultural issues with business, then follow the newsletter, recruitingbrainfood.com. I would say connect with me on LinkedIn, but I think I'm hitting the connection limit on that, so I'm not sure that's a good thing anymore. Facebook, if you know where I am there, just add me there. I think I've still got a couple thousand to go, so happy to chat with you there as well.
That's wonderful. And you were very, very kind to offer a pretty unique gift for anyone that may actually be watching us right now around them potentially arriving in your newsletter, I believe.
That's right. So the newsletter Recruiting Brain Food goes to 10,000 people in the recruitment and HR space, including a lot of individuals that work and care about things like corporate social responsibility and so forth. So I'm going to do a raffle for anybody who wants their NGO or charity to be freely featured into one of the Brain Food newsletters. You simply need to push out a raffle to say, I forget what the mechanics are, but it'll be some sort of social share about the summit. Make sure you add me, mention me on that, and I'll record you as a ticket in there, and then we'll do a raffle draw, and the winner will basically get a free slot to advertise their or promote, should I say, their NGO into that newsletter. Hopefully, it'll give that institution a bit of visibility.
It's wonderful. Very, very generous of you, Hung, and thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate your time.
Gary, it's been a pleasure. Great work on this summit. Look forward to seeing other people's conversations.
Thanks very much. Take care. All the best.
Take care. Bye.